Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. Oh, what's her name? There's she's like a preferred. Okay, so in this image, we've got a collage. So the background is black, like the far background is essentially black. On top of it, I can sort of see a black and white. It's like a black and white print of the whole planet. And on top of that is a collage of headlines from a newspaper or whatever. Like, there is no climate emergency. Another one is rising CO2 is greening the planet. CO2 is not a pollutant. Global warming is a non-problem. So these are all like kind of cut and pasted onto this thing. And in the middle, in white letters on a red background, says deniers. So it's just, obviously it's the only color in the image. We have this blood red well, the letters are white, but it's on a box, it's blood red. It looks like a Barbara Kruger image. I don't know if you know who she is. Mm-hmm. She's a photographer. Oh yeah. So it's kind of that feeling. Take it away.
So one of the things I definitely wanted to talk about are what it says in the picture, climate deniers, and just this. I can't believe we're talking about this, but we are, because it's a thing that people still don't believe there's anything bad happening. And we're certainly living now in this sort of post-truth era where facts don't matter as much anymore as they probably should. And there's even statistics showing that we've become so polarized in our viewpoints that we refuse to listen. We refuse to get out of that thought bubble that we're stuck in, whether that's from social media or anything that we consume. And that doesn't change when you look at issues like climate change and sustainability. There are still a very vocal group of people who do not believe it's happening, the climate deniers. And just for a bit of context, I mean, at this stage, it's something like 97% of credible scientists say that climate change is a thing, it's happening, we need to do something. There's even a group called the Skeptical Scientists Association that say that climate change is a thing, and those are the skeptical scientists.
Right.
So it's a very small faction of scientists that say, this isn't happening. And they're encouraging people to deny it. And a lot of those people are hearing these messages coming from big corporate lobby groups that are sort of filtering in more of that greenwashing and climate denialism. But it's quite a sad state of affairs, and I don't bring it up with the sense that I have any solutions to it. I don't know how to get those people on side. If you're at this stage seeing everything happen and you go, oh no, it's fine, it's just, the natural way the earth works, or right. We've had stronger hurricanes this year, and we've had 1 in 1,000. You hear this all the time. It's the 1 in 1,000 year storm that's already happened 5 times this decade. Like, right. Well, there's something going on. Why is your head in the sand?
Well, there is the not that I'm going to address what you're saying. I'm just sort of thinking, like, this is kind of your world. And so, for example, since you are in Melbourne, you're in Australia, and you've moved from, a society where you're basically an outsider. So when you've shifted into Australia, you're still kind of an outsider in which you're an American. How do you see your mentalities morphing given the location?
Really interesting question, and I think that's part of the joy, the interesting thing, and also the struggle of traveling, being a global citizen, as they call it. It is that need to morph and adapt, and to always remember in the back of your head that when you are somewhere else, you're a guest in that space, and you definitely need to remember that. You need to adapt to that in a lot of ways, and I think, whether it's in China, I lived a stint in Korea, and now in Melbourne, there are slight shifts. But I think what is good in my space, and what I do at least professionally, is it's quite culturally agnostic. So
Okay.
there's not that much of a shift that needs to happen. People know that we need to change. People know there are ways to do it. So I don't need to necessarily adapt a bit of the messaging here and there and, what we talk about. I mean, in Australia, certainly they love to dig things out of the ground when it comes to the corporate world. So, the timbre of the conversation changes a bit. But at the end of the day, I'm not having to morph and change how I approach things too much, at least in the professional sense. The personal world, very different.
So how in your work, when you're in a boardroom situation, because there it's all driven by self-interest, right? So it's people are just like, okay, I want to improve sales, or I want to improve whatever it is. But how do you run into climate denial in a corporate setting?
Yeah, it's an interesting approach that one has to take. And, I would have loved to have been in the room when, whenever it was back in the 70s and 80s, some marketing guru came up with how we approach sustainability messaging. It's always the same thing. You see the polar bear on the melting ice cap. You see, this dystopian future, sort of like Mad Max-ish. And that's so out there for people that from just to put your marketing hat on and put your communications hat on, that's not going to work, right? People can't relate to that. People can't get what that has to do with them. And I think in a lot of ways, because of that, and we'll talk about this in a sec, but there's this sense that, what am I supposed to do if that's the future, if it's inevitable, if that's what's being marketed to me? As one of only 8 billion people, I can't do anything about that, so I'm going to sit back and do nothing at all. That's individuals. But when you get to the corporate world, adjusting the message is so important. And I think that's in a lot of ways where more of the activist community is lacking, is that they're not adjusting the message to make it resonant and salient to those folks in a corporate world. So to do that, you have to talk about money. You have to marry this idea of doing better and being altruistic with the bottom line. And I don't see anything wrong with putting those things together. I think they should be working in lockstep. And so when you start to frame things that way versus getting on a soapbox in the boardroom, ears start to perk up when you start to say, okay, if you look at your competition, these are the folks that are more sustainable. They're doing much better than you are financially with consumer attrition, etc. They start to listen. So you frame it in a way that makes sense to them. That's the simple solution to do it. It's not so simple sometimes, but I think that definitely gets people listening. And in the boardroom, they're certainly more pragmatic. So they understand, like you said, that it comes down to the bottom line. And if that bottom line is going to be sustainable because I'm sustainable, they're all for it.
Right. I think my brain just floated off into the distance because it's not only about, it's communication, right? So it's not only about what you want to say. It's like you have to understand who is listening. So it's like if I'm speaking to a puppy, I know this sounds good, but if I'm speaking to a puppy, I understand, because I've had dogs so much, I understand how to change my communication so the puppy understands, is getting the message, right? And so within a boardroom context, though, how do you deal in terms of your training with the sort of the mismatch that in order to get the message across to, within a corporate setting, that by definition, by vocabulary, by concept, whatever, they're incapable of processing the message that somebody from an activist mind would connect with. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, how do you bridge those? Because fundamentally, the two different brains who are, it's like speaking to a puppy. Like, the puppy just can't understand. The brain just doesn't get it.
Absolutely. A really good example of that is a lot of the factory work that I used to do. So when I was working with BSR, who's sort of the McKinsey of the sustainability world, what we would do is we would always get met with the skeptics, particularly the middle managers, when we would go in to talk about the work that we do. And the middle managers, as anybody who works in the corporate world understands, they're the ones that sort of make or break things, right? They're the gatekeepers at the end of the day.
They're operators.
The operators. Yeah. What we would tend to do is we would create or we would pitch these large-scale social programs, particularly around women's empowerment. So I'm sure I'm allowed to say this. So Walmart, I know they get raked across the coals in the United States and other places for some of the worker stuff that they're doing in the developed world.
This podcast is fully supported and sponsored by Walmart.
Okay.
Walmart. Where they I'm just joking. Totally joking.
I'll make sure to pitch them well then. No. But they do, I know they get raked across the coals, but in the developing world, and yeah, you're right, we don't use that term anymore, but in places like China, they are doing amazing things when it comes to the social part of sustainability. And just for clarity, backing up just a quick second, sustainability is not just environmentalism. Sustainability also involves anything with social, human, and labor rights, and it involves governance and transparency at a corporate level as well. So it's an umbrella term. But in that situation, when we're trying to pitch worker betterment programs, women's empowerment programs, things that will help their workers be better people, we don't approach the conversation that way because that's a very altruistic thing. It's an altruistic endeavor, absolutely. Does a middle manager care about bettering their workers? No, they care about the widgets getting produced. So what do? We tell them, and this is how we pitch it. We would say, okay, if your workers are better educated, have stronger communication skills, if they understand the basics of personal health and well-being, and I'll give a really graphic example. Feel free to edit this out. But in China, good. In China, contraception and sex education is not typically discussed. It's a very taboo subject. So if somebody is to get pregnant, they would use abortion as a form of contraception, not using a prophylactic or whatever. A lot of times you have a lot of female workers who will have an abortion and have to take lots of time off work to recover. If you teach that person that is not the only option they have when it comes to getting, sex education, they're not going to be missing work as much. They're going to be healthier. They're probably going to be happier as a result. And what happens then is that healthy, happy workers are more productive workers. There's a better retention rate. They come to work more, so you have less absenteeism. And by and large, we have statistics that show they also like the company more and they stay with you, so you have lower attrition overall. Then middle managers go, oh, okay, so that impacts my bottom line because now they're able to make more stuff and it's just easier on me overall. They start to listen that way. So it's an altruistic endeavor, but it's also framed in the language and the reality of what that altruistic endeavor can create in the long run.
That's fantastic. It also put in my head that I should ask Trojan to support the podcast, but that's a different
Trojan and Walmart, they might be at odds.
Okay, well, look, since we said Trojan and Walmart, let's move on to the next photo. You're like, who is this guy putting on this podcast? It's ridiculous. I believe that activism, sustainability, I may be wrong, but I think it's kind of like a chorus, right? And in a chorus, you could have all kinds of voices. You need the Paul Watsons who go out there with the Sea Shepherds and who just give the finger to the corporate world and say, no, absolutely not. But you need to have, the more, measured kind of, you need all those voices. And that's how we move everything.
Absolutely. 100%.
Okay. Let's go on to their last photograph. So is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting